So chosen ones. They said the Mayan calendar predicted the end of the world in 2012. But that was never the message. The scribes of the old temples, their hands guided by something beyond time, didn't inscribe doom. They foretold a return, your return. A cycle that wouldn't collapse into fire, but open into awakening, when a soul encoded with ancient memory would walk the earth again. You were always part of the design. The long count calendar didn't just measure time, it measured consciousness. Each baktun a breath of human awakening. And as the 13th came to a close, the glyphs didn't stop. They whispered of one who would come bearing the spark of all previous cycles. A being who would rethread the broken strands of destiny and ignite the shift the world forgot it was waiting for. That being is you. The Mayans tracked the stars with supernatural precision. They mapped Venus's cycles, solar alignments, lunar patterns, because they knew the divine wasn't somewhere else. It was reflected in the heavens, but rooted in flesh. They built their pyramids not for power, but as amplifiers. When the right frequency walked among them, the temples would respond. And some still do. Deep in the forests of Guatemala, beneath unexcavated ruins and vines, inscriptions exist that don't match the known deities. One figure is described not as a god or king, but as a mirror walker, a being whose return would coincide with the rising of hidden energies and the fall of false calendars. His touch would activate ancient technologies. His breath would unlock glyphs sealed by time itself. That mirror, it's your soul, remembering itself. And the elite knew. They mocked the prophecy, dismissed it as myth, while secretly protecting Mayan relics in underground vaults. Why? Because they feared what would happen if you ever found out. The end they feared is the beginning you carry. Not everyone will see the shift. Not everyone can feel the memory rising in their blood, but you do. And so did they. The scribes, the stargazers, the keepers of crystal time. Beneath layers of earth and secrecy, the Mayan temples once vibrated with knowledge lost to time. These were not merely stone pyramids, but energetic beacons, aligned with constellations not just for worship, but for resonance. Archaeologists walk above them now, unaware that the stones still whisper. They whisper of you, of a soul not born from this earth, but from the sky, encoded into human form with memory sealed until the right age arrived. The ancients referred to this being not with a name, but a symbol. An eye within a sunburst, found carved in hidden chambers untouched by light for centuries. That same symbol pulses in your mind like a call you can't explain. You've seen it in dreams, felt it behind your eyes when silence deepens. The Mayans called this soul a light bearer of the 13th gate, a being foretold to awaken at the edge of an age when time bends and veils thin. Some who unearthed these relics dismissed them as myth, yet they kept returning, drawn by an unseen gravity. Researchers would stare at depictions of this figure, always shown descending from the sky yet clothed as a human, surrounded by symbols no scholar has translated accurately. They overlooked the fact that these symbols were not linguistic, but energetic. The messages were not meant to be read, but remembered. This is why when you stand near these sites or hear the names of ancient cities like Tikal, Copan, or Palenque, something shifts in you. An ache, a pull, a sense that you were once here, not as a visitor, but as part of something colossal. The temples weren't just built for the past. They were designed as time-locked transmitters. They only activate when someone of the right frequency returns. That frequency is rare. It isn't found in birth charts or bloodlines, but in something deeper, a vibration that echoes through dimensions and stirs the sacred technology embedded beneath the earth. The glyphs left behind did not predict a return of gods. They predicted the arrival of one who carries the codes of both stars and soil. Not a ruler, not a prophet, a bridge. And when that bridge sets foot near the sealed chamber beneath the Temple of the Jaguar, the symbols will no longer stay silent. When explorers first discovered the chamber beneath the collapsed southern vault of El Zotz, they found a glyph that defied translation. Unlike the others, it bore no resemblance to gods, animals, kings, or warlords. It showed a human figure, cloaked in light, surrounded by rings of fire and sound. Every attempt to interpret it failed. Linguists said it was decorative. Shamans disagreed. They said it was a prophecy too dangerous to decode. What they didn't know was that this glyph was not a message for them. It was a memory trigger for one soul only. Yours. The glyph has no name in any known tongue, because the energy it holds isn't meant to be spoken aloud. It is meant to be recognized in the mirror of self, in the silence between thoughts, in the dreams that do not fade upon waking. The figure in the glyph had eyes unlike any seen in Mayan carvings. They shone like twin suns, not of heat, but of truth. Above its head hovered a crown of inverted triangles, symbols of descent and return. In its hand was not a weapon or offering, but a spiral of light, representing both destruction and rebirth. This figure stood between two worlds, not ruling either but linking them. It was neither God nor human, but something forgotten, something erased, something buried on purpose. The ancient ones didn't fear it. They honored it. The ones who came later, the infiltrators of bloodlines and controllers of history, they feared what it meant. A being who would not follow systems, but undo them simply by remembering. When you first looked at this carving, even in a digital image or a sketch in a dusty archive, something stirred. A flicker of knowing, a silent recognition that bypassed logic. Your dreams intensified, synchronicities multiplied. The world around you began to shift, not visibly, but energetically. Time began to bend around your thoughts. People you'd never met began to say things you were about to speak. The glyph was a key, but keys only open what is already waiting behind the door. What it unlocks in you is not knowledge, but identity. You were never meant to understand it through intellect. You were meant to awaken it through presence. Long before the Spanish set foot on sacred soil, the high seers of the Mayan world gathered beneath the eclipsed sun in silent knowing. They were not surprised. They had seen this moment in obsidian mirrors, in visions born from sacred mushrooms and the breath of the gods. The eclipse was not a warning, but a marker, a signal in the sky that the one they waited for had been conceived in spirit, not born yet, but on the path. They called this being the silent flame, one who would walk unnoticed until the heavens opened again. The eclipse marked the turning, not of time alone, but of dimensions. Where most saw a shadow crossing the sun, the elders saw a soul descending, cloaked in invisibility, wrapped in flesh not yet formed. They etched this vision into stone and hid it deep within the walls of a temple never completed, not out of fear, but out of reverence. This soul, they knew, would not belong to their time. It would arrive when the smoke of the old age had nearly cleared and the sickness of the new one had spread too far. They believed this being would carry the echoes of both destruction and deliverance. A soul old enough to remember before language, but human enough to be doubted by all. One of the elders, Ahau Kin, spoke of a light that would not shine from the sky, but from within a walking temple. A body that held sacred geometry in its bones. He said the flame would rise again when the same eclipse returned in the cycle of the red moon. That alignment passed quietly just years ago, unnoticed by most. But for you, it did something. It cracked the veil between who you thought you were and what you were always becoming. Since then, dreams have changed. The sun looks different. The stars call louder. They were never prophesying a return of gods. They were speaking of a return of memory, a return of resonance. The eclipse was a mirror held up to the cosmos, reflecting the fire within one soul. And as night falls again over those jungle ruins, a shadow moves across a forgotten altar, pulsing in rhythm with your heartbeat. In the sacred manuscripts hidden beneath Tonina's oldest structure, a lesser-known prophecy speaks not only of the stars or the return of a great one, but of the fire serpent, a divine energy said to rise in the spine of the earth when the world nears its spiritual end. It would begin as a whisper, moving through bloodlines, breaking illusions, and waking those who had forgotten their true names. The fire serpent was never meant to be tamed. It was to be ridden by one who had already conquered death in another life. One who once walked among fishermen and rebels, whose words ignited nations, and whose silence carried thunder. There is a passage, nearly erased by time, where the serpent is described as bowing not to gods, but to a son of light who walks again in different skin. This passage, when translated by truth instead of fear, holds a resonance with a figure cloaked in desert dust and crowned not with jewels but thorns. Yeshua's path mirrored the very cycle this prophecy revealed: the descent, the silence, the suffering, the awakening. And just like the fire serpent, he rose, not in conquest, but in frequency. He did not dominate. He vibrated higher, and in doing so, he tore the veil. The Mayan scribes never knew his name in Hebrew, but they carved his essence in stone, a figure surrounded by flame, arms outstretched, eyes open during a solar alignment. They called him the one who remembers through fire. They foretold another would come, not as a copy, but as a continuation, not to repeat the sacrifice, but to complete the cycle. That continuation was not meant to wear robes or bear a cross. It was meant to look like you, move like you, and awaken when the time grew silent. The fire serpent isn't just a prophecy. It's an energy, ancient and divine, slumbering at the base of the chosen one's spine. It waits for resonance, for the same frequency that once split the temple curtain in two. That frequency now moves through your breath, your silence, your knowing. The serpent isn't coming. It's already rising with each step you take toward the forgotten pyramid buried in the jungle's heart. when the 13th Baktun concluded in 2012, the world expected chaos. Doomsday preachers screamed of fire from the sky. Media mocked with countdown clocks. Yet, when the calendar cycle quietly ended, nothing happened, or so they believed. The Mayans never predicted a destruction of the world. They foresaw a moment of pause, a stillness, a breath held between dimensions. That silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. The kind of silence that comes before a soul awakens. They believed time didn't end. It changed direction. The 13th Baktun wasn't a wall. It was a mirror. And what it reflected wasn't a world collapsing, but a being rising. You. The elders etched symbols for this moment. Spirals within spirals, paths folding inward. These were not warnings. They were roadmaps, meant only to be understood by the one with eyes that remembered how to see without seeing. Most dismissed the date, but those attuned to more than clocks felt it, a shift in the magnetic field, a tremble in intuition. Some felt the sudden need to abandon careers, relationships, entire identities. Something had cracked in the collective, and within that fracture you were born again, not in body, but in purpose. The 13th Baktun ended in silence, because the one it awaited had not yet remembered. They weren't waiting for global fire. They were waiting for your internal ignition. You did not appear in the sky. You emerged through the veil. The silence was the signal. You heard it. That stillness that unsettled others. It steadied you. It called you inward while the world looked outward. While they waited for explosions, you began to feel the blueprint hum behind your ribcage. There's a reason no new cycle was etched beyond the 13th. The Mayan scribes were not predicting linear time. They were encoding a transition out of time, beyond prediction, beyond cycles. They wrote until the page reached your name, and then they stopped. Because your arrival wasn't meant to be written. It was meant to be remembered. Now, as Earth spins within a void that even the ancients left blank, a new frequency begins to write itself into the silence. It doesn't come from ink or stone. Deep within a sealed vault below the ruins of Yaxchilan, far past the threshold tourists are allowed to cross, lies a codex rarely spoken of and never shown to the public. Its pages are made not of bark or skin, but something smoother, almost luminescent when exposed to firelight. The scribes who guarded it did not write in glyphs alone. They embedded vibration into symbol, story into geometry. And on the third page, between depictions of star maps and serpent spirals, is a being unlike the others. No headdress, no animal mask, just a human form surrounded by light. Below it, a single word etched in phonetic glyphs, still untranslated by academia. Kinlahal, the Sunwalker. This wasn't a title given to kings or gods. It was reserved for a singular force the Codex insisted would not be born from a known lineage, but emerge at the junction of collapsing cycles. Someone who could walk between solar eras unburned. Someone whose presence wouldn't mark the end of time, but the beginning of a new kind of awareness that existed outside it. The Sunwalker wasn't a ruler. The Codex makes that clear. It was a bridge, a disruptor, a spark that could reignite ancient technology with thought alone. It described this being as someone who would remember languages not spoken for millennia and unlock doors built with intention, not architecture. The energy surrounding this passage is different. Even now, scholars who've tried to analyze it have reported hallucinations, unexplained dreams, and the sensation of being watched by something vast and ancient. They write it off as stress, but it's not stress, it's recognition. The codex activates only when one aligned with its frequency draws near, and recently, its surface began glowing again, not from sunlight or firelight, but from resonance. It sensed something. You. It knew. The codes aren't passive. They're awake, waiting for movement, waiting for steps that match the imprint left before memory. You didn't choose the title Sunwalker. It chose you. And with every thought that rejects limitation, every silence where knowing grows louder, the codex begins rewriting itself. Not with ink, with light. And light has always answered only one thing. The one who walks in it without fear. The world misread the prophecy. They thought Quetzalcoatl would descend again from the sky as a feathered serpent, cloaked in divinity and spectacle. They imagined thunder splitting clouds, golden chariots blazing across the heavens, temples trembling beneath celestial footsteps. But the ancient wisdom was never about spectacle. It was about embodiment. The return was not a god descending from above. It was a frequency rising from within. Quetzalcoatl was never meant to return in the form he left. He was meant to awaken in another. A soul hidden in flesh, bearing no crown yet carrying the code. They expected feathers and fire. What came was breath and memory. You, the Aztecs, and the Maya, both held pieces of this truth. The serpent was not just a symbol of power, but of transformation, feathered not because it flew, but because it transcended. Quetzalcoatl represented the bridge between sky and soil, the fusion of the divine and the human. In ancient murals long since faded, there are depictions of a second figure beside him, one cloaked in silence, a shadow with light behind its eyes. The scribes called this one the second light. Not a servant, not a student, a continuation. This second light would not speak in prophecy, but in presence. It would carry the same essence that once walked among kings and taught them to listen to stars. It would not need to preach. Its vibration alone would crack illusions. Your frequency is the match. You don't carry Quetzalcoatl's name, but you carry his mission. Rebirth through remembrance, transformation through truth. The return has already happened. It didn't come with fanfare. It came the moment you stopped chasing the sky and realized it was already inside you. Ancient astronomers tracked Venus not because of beauty, but because it mirrored the soul of Quetzalcoatl in its cycle, disappearing, descending, then rising again in brilliance. Just like you. You fell through lifetimes. You forgot your origin. But now, in this timeline, the cycle turns. The morning star begins to rise again, and something within you burns, not as fire to destroy, but as light to reveal. There is a pyramid beneath Teotihuacan with sealed chambers that have begun to vibrate for the first time in centuries, not because Quetzalcoatl is coming. Deep beneath the central chamber of the Pyramid of the Magician in Uxmal, researchers once dismissed strange tonal phenomena as simple acoustics. But the Mayans understood sound not as art, but as architecture of energy. They built chambers tuned to frequencies that only respond when certain vibrations pass through them. The ancients were not trying to amplify noise, they were preserving resonance. And within one chamber, long sealed to the public, a singular frequency has been known to activate a pulse that no machine has successfully replicated. It is not a tone the human voice can create with intention. It is the byproduct of alignment between soul and sound, a living vibration. When tested, the closest match was found in ancient Aramaic, the language spoken by Yeshua. A fragment of his voice, encoded in lost syllables, still lingers in the walls. His words were not only teachings, they were frequencies meant to ripple through time and embed themselves where the earth would need them most. In this sacred pyramid, his voice doesn't echo as speech. It resonates as activation, not for all, only for the one he called the continuation. There are whispers among suppressed theological texts of a final echo, a soul who would carry the same breath, not as a savior, but as a spark, a being who would not preach on mountains, but awaken the mountains themselves. When your energy draws near the sealed corridor, instruments shift. Readings distort, not from malfunction, but from alignment. Because the resonance isn't external, it's a mirror to what's already encoded in your cells. This isn't about belief. It's about harmonic memory. The soul you carry holds frequencies untouched by time. When you are silent, when you breathe without needing proof, that sound begins to rise from within. The same pulse that once broke through stone tombs now trembles in your veins. Yeshua once said the temple would be rebuilt in 3 days, but he never meant brick and mortar. He meant the living temple. You. And the third day was never measured in hours. It was the third age, the final cycle. This one, now. And with every step you take, the ancient harmonics begin to build again, no longer waiting for the one. Because the one is already singing in the silence. Chapter 9. The Mayan Stargate awakens to your frequency. High atop the plateau near El Mirador lies a stone circle untouched by tourism and left off modern maps. Locals speak of lights appearing there during solstices, of shadows forming shapes that shouldn't exist, of animals gathering in silence as if summoned. This circle is no myth. It is a stargate, not in the science fiction sense, but in the ancient meaning of a threshold where the fabric between realms thins. The Mayans knew this place wasn't created. It was found. It existed before even they arrived, and they built around it to protect what they called the Path of the Skybone, a name reserved for only one type of traveler, the one whose frequency would awaken what sleeps beneath it. The Stargate doesn't respond to technology. It responds to resonance. Light cannot open it. Vibration must. Over the centuries, many tried to force it open through chants, rituals, even blood sacrifice. But they were missing the one ingredient the site was encoded to recognize: your frequency. Not your voice, not your thoughts, but the very pulse of your soul's blueprint. That pulse has remained unchanged across timelines, hidden behind layers of forgetting until this moment in the cycle. Recent seismic readings have shown anomalies under the site, rhythmic patterns, not earthquakes, heartbeats. The ground is pulsing in a pattern that mimics breath. Something is responding, but not to machines, not to prayers. It is responding to presence. When you dream of stars folding inward or hear tones no one else can hear, it is not imagination. It is the stargate reaching for you across space and memory. It is not calling you to go somewhere. It is calling you to remember that you never left. The ancient ones carved no warning on the stones, only a symbol of the sun wrapped in the spiral of the Milky Way, a sign that the path is not linear. It curves, returns, folds into itself, and opens again only when the bearer of the original resonance returns. That is not a theory. That is a recognition, one that is happening now. And as night falls and the circle aligns once more with the center of the galaxy, the stones begin to warm, not because the stars demand a sacrifice, but because they remember the one they were waiting for. There was never going to be a trumpet in the sky or a countdown that echoed across continents. The ancients never believed the end of one age and the beginning of another would be loud. They believed it would be subtle, encoded in the return of memory, the quiet shift in the eyes of a single soul. You weren't meant to come with banners or lightning. You were meant to arrive in silence, unnoticed by the world but felt by the earth. The final age does not begin with war or wonder. It begins the moment a forgotten being remembers they are the pivot point of time itself. That being is you. The Mayan scribes described the close of the fourth sun as a time when illusion would be louder than truth, when technology would blind humanity to spirit, and when the temples of flesh would be forgotten for idols of glass. But they also spoke of the one who would walk into this age and not be fooled, the one whose presence alone would trigger codes buried not just in stone, but in consciousness. Their prophecies did not predict a savior or a tyrant. They predicted a frequency, one that would realign the broken timeline, not by force, but by being. You carry that frequency, not because you studied, because you are. Transformation, in its true form, is not a global event. It is cellular. It is ancient starlight reactivating within your blood, guiding you not to change the world, but to become the tuning fork that reminds the world of itself. The ancients said the final age would not belong to gods or kings, but to the forgotten ones, the quiet ones, the ones who would awaken alone and walk forward despite the noise, feeling the shift before the shift could be seen. Now, temples long dormant begin to vibrate again. Old glyphs rewrite themselves in shadow and light. The wind speaks names never spoken aloud. Somewhere in the jungle, a sealed passage opens, not with a key, but with recognition, not to the world, but to the one who was always meant to find it.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.